Now you lived in New York, you lived in LA. What made you go back to Kansas? I mean, obviously that's where you're from.
Well, Tom, it's like I've lived in a few different places, like LA, New York, and then a few years back, maybe a decade, I moved to Nashville for a little while, and I went on
Right.
the road. I was playing with Delbert McClinton, and you had to live there to get on the
Sure.
bus every Thursday night to go do his 1 gig a week. So, and then after that ended, Peter was in Nashville,
Right, that's right.
and yet
Right.
I had to get on the bus in Nashville there. But between Delbert and Peter, I decided I was just going to come back home to where I'm most, it's where I grew up. I love it here.
Yeah.
Joe Vitale, who is we're doing a project together right now, the great drummer Joe Vitale.
Vinyl
And
machine.
yeah. And so Joe has always lived in Ohio, where he's from,
Yes.
Kent State, Canton, Ohio.
Right.
And so I'm kind of like Joe, I just like to be at home. I'm comfortable here.
Well, the cool thing is now you don't have to live in LA or New York or Nashville. You can live wherever
Yeah,
you want. Yeah.
that's so true. Back in the day, we had to migrate
Yeah. Yeah.
if we wanted to get any kind of attention anywhere.
Right, right. And you guys were in Colorado. Well, David, let's talk about Stanley Sheldon. What a career you've had. Okay. He's a bass player, he's a composer, he's an educator. Not only has he worked with Delbert McClinton, but I have, let's see my list, Warren Zevon, Joe Bonamassa, Lou Gramm, right? You did work with Warren Hayes, Albert King, Larry Carlton. You pinch hit for Mel Schachtner and Grand Funk Railroad. Man, that's some heavy
That's
lifting
been
right
fun.
there.
That's been really fun to play with Don Brewer on drums is something to be.
Wow.
You got to see it to believe it. This
I've
guy.
seen, yeah, yeah. And then, of course, Steve Lukather, Roger McGuinn. You did Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke, one of the most important films of the 20th century, David.
I
Yes,
have
as a matter of fact, that's
feeling-
one of Fellini's favorite movies, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Joe Fellini,
Joe
not
Fellini, who lives down the block from him. Yeah.
It's
Hey, Joe. And of course,
what's funny. No, go ahead.
yeah, Stanley anchored probably two of the most influential, among the most influential albums of my generation was Frampton Comes Alive, of course, and Tommy Bolin's Teaser. You're in the right place at the right time. Now, Stanley, I have to thank you because I started off as a classical guitar player, and you can't meet girls playing classical guitar. At least I couldn't anyway. So as the classical
You have
guitar,
trouble doing it playing bass. So
I do too. Well, that's another story. But the classical guitar is the same technique as the electric bass, and that was 1975, 76. And I had to learn how to play electric bass. So what did I do? Got this album. And then, David, they had back in those days, they had a thing called the gatefold. Okay. I don't know if you remember.
No seeds?
No seeds in there. No. So, but look at this guy with his chest, his bare chest. His bass has no frets on it. And I was like, what the heck?
That's the way it should be, Tom.
Is that right? Is that? Well, Stanley, it's very interesting because this record was pretty much pre-Jocko. The world didn't know about Jocko then. So the fretless bass was really off the radar. But it was you, it was Kenny Passarelli, and Boz Burrell were all playing fretless bass.
Don't forget Freebo.
And Freebo. Okay, yes, got to get Freebo in there.
And the first bass player I saw using one was a few years prior to that. When we did Comes Alive, Jocko, released that first he became the bass player in Weather Report that same 76.
Yes.
So I knew about him, but he was like the pinnacle of what fretless player could do. I mean, Jocko to this day, he's still considered like the greatest ever on electric bass, and I sure do. There's some others that have come along, but I forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, oh yeah, Rick Danko was the first bass player I saw.
Right, of course. Yeah.
With a fretless.
Yeah, that Ampeg.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing, Stanley, because both you and I purchased fretless basses in 1969. What was your reason for doing it?
It was just one of those things. Fender issued it that year, I believe. That's the first year it was issued, and it was the first time I think I'd seen one hanging on a rack other than, you know, Ampeg did have one earlier, but it was a little bigger. It was more like a baby bass, what we
Right.
call. And I have a baby bass that I use for salsa gigs. You know, it's like an upright built in Puerto Rico, modeled after that original Ampeg. But when I saw the Fender Precision Fretless, it was just so the look of it, the feel of it. I just had to have one, and I didn't even know if I had the ear to play it in tune. But I started working at it, you know, with Tommy Bolin early on, and we were playing fusion music, and it was a perfect vehicle to apply to the fusion concept. I was a lot more. I had a lot more latitude with Tommy than I did with Peter. With Peter, you know, I just kind of played a note and just played it in tune and no sliding like you hear a lot of fretless. You know, Tony Franklin is really a great player. He's another one. Boz Burrell, that's his last name, right? Burrell?
Yes,
Right.
yes. Bad Company, yeah.
He and I were kind of contemporary, you know, doing the same thing. He didn't really he didn't elaborate much with the notes either. He just tried to play it in tune. Chris Kimsey told me, Chris Kimsey used to laugh at me. He said, yeah, sometimes he wasn't. But I think he had to struggle a little more than some, you know, and I was, you know, I have to be very focused when I play the fretless because I have to make sure it's in tune. And for that reason, I'm not playing it as much these days because it's too demanding. And I have to be so focused. That night of Frampton Comes Alive, you know, I was used to playing the fretless every day for the last 4 or 5 years.
Sure.
So I was really kind of used to it at that point.
Yeah.
Well, what made you go from, because if I recall, the original Precision Fretless was Rosewood.
Right. I just had them both. I like both the maple and the rosewood. You know, I was with Frampton. I could get any bass I wanted, basically.
Sure.
And just, you know, it came with dinner. So that was great.
That's the way it goes, right?
Why do you think they chose you as a player? What did you bring to the table for Tommy and Peter?
You know, it's a good question. I think more than anything, I consider myself a good bass player. I'm not schooled, you know. I don't, you know, over the years I've learned pretty good, you know, the theory pretty much. There's always more to learn with music, but I think what I brought to the table more than anything was my sense of time.
Okay.
I was always just locked in on where that one is.
Yeah.
And drummers really like that. And I got to play with 10 of the greatest drummers that have ever lived within about 2 years when John Semioli was having problems. The first person that was brought in was Gregor Rico, Sly and the Family Stone. Second was Andy Newmark. Third, Rick Marotta. 4, Joe Vitale. 5, Jamie Oldacre. 6, Gary Malabar. I mean, the list just keeps going.
That's a bunch of hacks.
Right?
God.
So I've been spoiled with drummers. And
okay.
I don't work around here because there's no drummers.
Yeah. Well, here's a funny thing. We had we interviewed Rudy Sarzo, and he was talking.
I met Rudy finally a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Yeah, very good guy. Smart. Really smart. But he was talking about, so when he was on the road with Ozzy, he would use a fretless on some of the tunes because he could tune it down. It took 4 months for Ozzy to realize there are no frets on this bass. So this is a preamble to an interesting question. What was Peter's vibe to you? You know, you spend time with Greg Ridley. I was actually in one of the later versions of Humble Pie, and I had to play a fretted bass. But what was Peter's reaction to you using fretless? Was there any hesitation at first?
It was actually his request.
Really?
Was looking. He had, before I auditioned with him, and the reason I got the audition is because Peter had heard the new Barnstorm album with Kenny playing fretless on Rocky Mountain Way.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
And other tracks. And he he offered Kenny the gig, and Kenny was either still with Walsh or about to go play with Elton.
Right.
All right.
Okay. Right.
He'd been asked to play with Elton. When he got in Elton's band, they asked him to please put the fretless down. But he was using it, and Peter saw it, and it was just a thing back then, you know. Fretless bass, anybody that could play one, they figured the guy had to be pretty good because he can play it in tune. And that's what Peter told me when I auditioned with him at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. I pushed my little Vibra-Verb amp up the steps to the elevator on Wilshire Boulevard. He was about, floor 15 or something. So I took my fretless bass and we sat down. You know that song, Money? I'll give you a bone.
Sure.
Take you a bone. It's got a slide in it. You know,
Yes.
right in the song. So Peter said, I really was looking for a guy that could play fretless. So when I went to his room, I brought the fretless and we played that song. And we also played a little bit of something else. Maybe I Love Your Way or something. He goes, okay, here's my 3 solo albums. I'm going to the dentist in 3 weeks. You have 3 weeks to learn all the songs on the 3 solo albums. And we won't know until you play with John. You know.
Okay.